to live stream. We are live streaming our class, the Kabbalah of Meaning. This is lesson 5, Kabbalah of Meaning, lesson 5. If we open up the textbooks, live stream, we are live streaming our class, the Kabbalah of... It's a bit of a feedback loop. And we're starting lesson 5 in our books, can be found on page 125. But let's start with an exercise that can be found in our books on page 127. And the exercise says, list 2 to 3 recent things you chose to do that felt meaningful. So, and the next part of the question is list 2 to 3 recent things that happened to you. So, in other words, there are things in life we choose, and then there's things in life that we basically didn't choose and we have to deal with. And the question essentially over here, ladies and gentlemen, is which one do you find more meaningful? The things that you choose or the things that happen to you and you have to deal with them because you just got to deal with them. You don't have a choice. So it's not such a complicated exercise, and we don't have to really spend a lot of time on it. But my question to you, and the more interesting one, is who, by show of hands, who finds it more meaningful when they choose to do things, and who finds it more meaningful when they are responding to things that just sort of happen to them? So if you find it more meaningful when you choose, raise a hand. Okay, we got 2 hands raised. If you find it more meaningful when things happen to you and you respond to it that way, raise a hand. We've got 1 who likes to be in responsive mode. And if it makes no difference to you one way or another, either things are equally not meaningful or meaningful, then please raise a hand.
Sometimes things that happen to me I don't think are meaningful, but afterwards I find out that they really were meaningful.
Okay, well, that's very, very interesting and very important point, and we're going to examine that as we go through today's class. So, ladies and gentlemen, looking at the screen, the Kabbalah of Meaning, lesson 5, the theme of today is finding meaning in the unchosen, in the things of life that we don't choose. And let's do a quick refresh for where we're up to in our course. In lesson 1, we spoke about the human hunger for meaning. We are wired to need meaning, to want meaning, and we spoke about different ways that we can find meaning, but we said essentially in lesson 2 that meaning alone doesn't suffice, because meaning is very subjective, and if you decide that something's meaningful but it's not really purposeful, it's not ultimately going to be fulfilling, and therefore the importance, we said in lesson 2, of finding more than meaning, actually finding purpose. And in lesson 3, we said, well, hold on a second. So there's purpose, but objectively, is there a purpose to everything? And we said, yes. The Creator, God Almighty, has a purpose for which He created the world. And Torah reveals the underlying purpose of all of creation, which is to bring more spirituality, godliness, warmth, light into the physical world, and especially into the most mundane areas of life, bringing spirituality and elevated living into every dimension of our lives. In lesson 4 last week, we spoke about the rhythms of time, about how Kabbalah teaches that the calendar has its own internal spiritual clock. And when we can learn how to read the calendar and understand the dimensions of the times that we're in, we can tap into all kinds of spirituality and meaning in everything that we do. And we spoke a bit about Shabbat and the holidays and those things. Sounds good? Which brings us, ladies and gentlemen, to lesson 5, is can I find meaning in things I did not choose? And actually today, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go a lot deeper. We're going to a lot deeper. We've got some beautiful texts, some deep Kabbalistic concepts about the universe, spirituality, life. That's going to be very thing. Now, I want to just say that today was the 20th of Kislev in the Jewish calendar. Last week, we learned about the importance of calendar. Today was the 20th of Kislev. And the 20th of Kislev is the day after the 19th of Kislev. And the 19th of Kislev is one of those days that is charged with incredible spiritual meaning, because it is a day that is marked as the birthday, as the Rosh Hashanah of the deeper dimensions of life. The history of the day we'll save for another day, how this day was chosen to be such an important spiritual day, but it really is. Almost to say that if Rosh Hashanah, right, the main Rosh Hashanah that we all know about, is the Rosh Hashanah for the body, then the 19th of Kislev and the 20th of Kislev, which is today, is the Rosh Hashanah for the soul and for the deeper dimension of life. So getting together with everybody tonight, ladies and gentlemen, this is a very powerful day. It's really the day of the beginning of the Chabad movement, the day of the greatest spiritual things. I'm going to say L'chaim to everybody, that God Almighty should bless us with meaning and with spirituality and deeper meaning in all our lives as it's revealed in the teachings of Hasidism, which we're studying here today, the revelation of Kabbalah and all the deepest elements. So L'chaim, everybody. It's very meaningful for me to be studying this material with you tonight, the Kabbalah of meaning on the 20th of Kislev. Okay, having done that, we can now go back to our regular broadcast and our regular programming, ladies and gentlemen, with a enthused vitality of light and vitality that Yutas Kislev contains within it. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages, sit back, fasten your seatbelts. We're going to go into a very, very deep discussion tonight. The great philosopher of Judaism, Maimonides, was one of the greatest philosophers of Judaism, one of the greatest legal minds that Judaism ever had, and writers, one of the greatest articulators of theology of Judaism. He summarized the most important principles of Jewish theology into 13 principles, known as the 13 principles of faith in Judaism. And there are many people that have a custom to recite these 13 principles every day. And when you say them, each one begins with the words, Ani ma'amin, I believe. Ani ma'amin, I believe. The most famous of Maimonides' 13 principles is his last one. The last one, the 13th principle, is Maimonides' articulation. It's famous because it's been made into a song. Ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin, ani ma'amin. V'yemunah sheleimo bevias HaMoshiach, bevias HaMoshiach, ani ma'amin. You might have heard that song before. It's a song that articulates Maimonides' 13th principle, which is not in our books. But that principle is, Maimonides writes, I believe with complete faith is the 13th principle of Judaism. 13th principle of Jewish theology is, I believe with complete faith in the coming of the Messiah. And the idea being, it's a very important principle of Judaism, because what it essentially means that Judaism teaches us, all the prophets teach us, that there is the end of time will be a time in the end, we will all live happily ever after. And that is a very, very important thing to know. Because imagine I gave you the book of this world. So a lot of people worry what's going to be in the end. So the good news is, it's an essential principle of Jewish faith that in the end, we all live happily ever after. So, sometimes you read a novel and you wonder what's going to happen. So you read the last page. So I can tell you what the last page looks like. On the last page of life, we all live happily ever after. It all comes to a good conclusion. The thing is, sometimes when you're in the middle of it, you wonder, oh my gosh, there's no way that that's going to happen over here. So many things can go wrong. How do we? But Judaism teaches. Judaism is optimistic. Judaism is uplifting. The prophets teach us in the end, everybody lives happily ever after. How's it going to happen? Exactly? Don't know. But we should know there is a master plan. And God Almighty is running the world. And in the end, everybody's going to live happily ever after. So that actually brings us to Maimonides' first principle. The first principle is God created the world and God runs the world. So let's read it inside. Page 128 in our books. Maimonides says, I believe with complete faith that the Creator, blessed be his name, is the creator and guide of all created beings. He alone made, makes, and will make all things. Everything is made and run, and in the present tense, God makes all things that are in the world. Now that's fascinating that we say in the present tense that God makes everything.
Mhm.
I can understand that we would say God made everything, but does God still make everything? And for this, ladies and gentlemen, we are going to analyze some deep mystical texts within Judaism. Now, some people, what do they say? It's not nice to talk about God in polite society. Well, it's okay. The good news is we can, because we believe, and Judaism teaches, that we all have a soul within us. And the soul is wired to want more spirituality and connection with God. In fact, there was an article this week that somebody sent me about 2 books that came out this year by very prominent scientists. I have to find this article. 2 books that came out that the consensus in science is moving towards the idea of the plausibility and, in fact, possibly even the probability of a creator God. It's moving that way. And psychologists are saying, and there's an article here from a psychologist on page 129 in our book, that we are wired to want this level of spirituality. Lisa Miller writes, each of us is endowed with a natural capacity to perceive a greater reality and consciously connect to the life force that moves in, through, and around us. Whether or not we participate in a spiritual practice or adhere to a faith tradition, whether or not we identify as religious or spiritual, our brain has a natural inclination towards a docking and a docking station for spiritual awareness. An awakened brain is available to all of us right here in our neural circuitry, but we have to choose to engage it. It's a muscle we can learn to strengthen or let atrophy.
Mhm.
So, ladies and gentlemen, back to the PowerPoint for a few moments. So, can I find meaning in things I didn't choose? The answer is yes, we can and we should. And Maimonides' first principle that we just read, that he alone made, makes, and will make all things, is a very important step towards that. We're all wired for spirit. That spiritual perception is innate. Faith is actually in our DNA. So, I pointed out before when we were reading Maimonides that he appears to say, he says this fascinating thing, that creation happens in the present tense. God makes the world. And this is a very, very important principle in Judaism, that creation is not only a one-time event that took place however many years ago, but actually God is constantly bringing the world into existence all the time. Now, this is a fascinating concept that requires, obviously, analysis and more study, which is what we're going to engage in for the next few minutes. Toby, I think there's somebody coming to the door. So if they are, I'm not sure. I think I saw lights pulling up. If you hear the door knocking, will you get it, Toby? Okay, excellent. So I don't see anyone, but that's because I can't see anything outside there. Okay. So there's the idea, one option. So God created everything and then assigned celestial forces to manage the world. But the doctrine of constant creation, or the theory or the idea, the theology, actually that's the right word, of constant creation, is that God is constantly renewing the act of creation. His influence is ongoing and intentional. So let's explore that. So firstly, let's show how this is central to Jewish writings. And one place we saw it is in how Maimonides writes in the present tense. If you look in our prayers, we say every single day in the prayer book on page 129, it's quoted over here on page 129 at the bottom of the page, we say every day about Hashem, about God, HaMechadesh Petuvei B'chol Yom Tamid Maaseh Bereshis. In his goodness, God renews each day, continually, the act of creation. As it is said, give thanks to he who makes great luminaries, makes in the present tense, for his kindness is eternal. So, we're going to now study a fascinating text. In my opinion, it's worth this whole course. I like text. I like classic Jewish texts that articulate very important ideas. And the text that we're going to read now, which can be found on page 130, is a quote from Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz, known as the Shalah. If you look at the side of the inside margin on the page, it tells us who he is. One of the most important Jewish theologians who ever lived. And he wrote like this. He lived from 1565 to 1630. He was a Kabbalist and author. Rabbi Horowitz was born in Prague and served as rabbi in several prominent Jewish communities, including Frankfurt am Main and his native Prague. After the passing of his wife in 1620, he moved to Israel. In Tiberias, he completed his Shnei Luchot HaBrit, an encyclopedic compilation of Kabbalistic ideas. He is buried in Tiberias next to Maimonides. So next time you're in Israel, ladies and gentlemen. So here we're studying Maimonides and the Shalah next to each other. It's fascinating. They lived 500 years apart, but they buried next to each other in Tiberias, two of the most important theologians in Jewish history. His last name was Horowitz. Do you know any Jewish people by the name Horowitz? There is a good chance that if their last name is Horowitz, they are descendants of the Shalah, Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz. And they're also, he's a Levi. Most Horowitzes are from the tribe of Levi, and they are descendants of the Shalah. Not all, but most. So if you know any Horowitzes, Gorowitz is the similar thing. Horowitz and Gorowitz is the same name, and very often they're descendants from the Shalah. By the way, just a little myth, I don't know about a myth is the wrong word, a legend. There's a legend by many descendants of the Shalah, of Rabbi Yeshayahu Halevi Horowitz, and this is a little bit of a plug for our next course. In the 1500s and 1600s, there was a major controversy in Europe. Major controversy came to Europe. And our next course is going to we're going to discuss rabbinic controversies throughout the ages. That's going to be, I think, and we're going to talk about certain ones. And one of the major controversies in the 1500s and 1600s in Europe was a new bird had arrived in Europe from the Americas, the turkey. And the controversy is it a kosher bird or not? And most rabbis took the view that it is a kosher bird. But there's a tradition amongst descendants of this rabbi that he felt the bird is not a kosher bird. And many of them to this day won't eat turkey. Although the consensus amongst Jewish authorities that the turkey is a kosher bird. So these kinds of controversies, historical controversies, and the rabbis' opinions and how they came to, and the process by which these types of controversies are adjudicated is going to be the subject of our next course that begins in February. So it's a very interesting course about history and the rabbinic process. And that's coming up in February. It's a very different type of a course and a very interesting course. But anyway, back to his theology, not the bird. We'll leave the dodo behind, not the dodo, we're talking about the turkey. Let's leave that behind and go back to the theology. And Rabbi Horowitz says a fascinating thing. Now, if you read Hebrew, you'll see at the first words, it says, Hine svaras ha'olam hi. Hine svaras ha'olam hi. The thought of the world is, or here they translate it, is the common understanding. The common understanding is this. Now, very often in rabbinic writings, when they want to convey an idea, they'll tell you the world thinks such and such, but this is really the truth. So he's going to the first paragraph, he's going to give us a popular myth. And in the second paragraph, he's going to show why it's wrong. You with us? First paragraph is a popular myth. The second paragraph, why it's wrong. So the popular myth is like this. The common understanding of how the heavenly forces operates is this. God, the blessed creator, brought everything into being from absolute nothingness, and therefore has the power to do whatever he wills, even to override or suspend the natural order. At the outset, he assigned spiritual forces to govern the world, each one appointed over its own realm. The world continues to function according to these systems, as if his hand has stepped back, except on such occasions when he chooses to intervene and override them. Until then, these forces operate through the power he originally placed within them at the time of at the time of creation. Right? So basically, God sets the motions of the universe in play. He winds that up, sets play, boom, lets the whole thing play out. For the most part, things run according to nature, except for if God chooses to intervene. That's the common myth, says the Shalah. That's what people think, but they're wrong. That's not the way it really works. Because the way it really works is, but in truth, as it seems to me, our faith teaches otherwise. God, in his goodness, is constantly and deliberately renewing the act of creation every single day. His influence is ongoing and intentional. If for even a moment he were to withdraw this flow, everything would immediately dissolve into nothingness. All of existence would simply cease. Meaning, creation isn't something that happened once, however many thousands of years ago. Creation happens every moment, says the Shalah. It's a very interesting text. Yes, Marty?
Can we think of that in literal terms? Like as you read this and I think about it, I think of the seasons and life and birth and decomposition and how the body, the leaves, the plants, as they decompose, they feed the new life.
So that's, you're thinking about within the physical world. Let's read another text. So to explain this text, we're going to bring another text. A few hundred years later, a couple of hundred years later, the Alter Rebbe, Rabbi Shneur Zalman in the Tanya explains this idea in more detail. Page 132. These are very important mystical texts, understanding how the world works.
You mentioned, but it seems to me.
Interesting.
Right?
Very interesting. So he says a little bit further. He says, he says that seems to me. That's true. He does say it seems to me. It's based on the tradition, but it was quite a novelty when he said the articulation over here. His articulation is new but old, because we already say in the prayer book on page 129, in his goodness, God renews each day continually the act of creation. So it's a very similar idea. So your question is a good question. What's new here and what's old here? It's a good question. Let's lead page 130 and we'll discuss it a little bit more. So Rabbi Shneur Zalman, the Alter Rebbe, explains it further in the Tanya. And he has a new articulation, deeper than, with more detail than before. And this is these are very important texts in the evolution and revelation of this idea. So page 132. He says, this idea offers a clear response to those who deny divine providence and the miracles of the Torah. Now, the question is like this. See, there's two models. One is the one-time creation model, and we're rejecting the one-time creation model in exchange for the constant creation model. Another analogy to explain the same thing, a one-time creation is like a painter that paints on a canvas, takes some colors, puts them on a canvas, hangs the canvas on the wall, and then leaves the room, and it's still there, right? You can expect that you come back, the canvas will still be there. On the other hand, according to the constant creation model, it's not really like a painting on the wall. It's more like a projection on a wall that if you pull the plug, the thing is going to disappear. It needs to be constantly it needs to be constant. I'm going to put the projection on the screen so you can see what I'm talking about. It needs to be constantly renewed, because if you pull the plug out for a second, the image is going to completely disappear. In other words, the image, there's nothing permanently changed. So now we're going to explain, why are we so insistent in a constant creation rather than a one-time creation? Why is that? So let's see. It all goes down to this idea, ladies and gentlemen, of the concept of creation of something from nothing. They tell a story about a laboratory. You heard the story? There was a laboratory that the scientists did a tremendous amount of discovery, and they invented a machine where you could take dirt, mix it with water, throw it into the machine, turn a switch, and after a few hours, poof, out would come a human being. So they sent a letter to God, and they said, "Dear God, we've figured out how to make life, and we don't need you anymore." So God sent an email back, and he said, "Well done, but next time, please bring your own dirt. Don't use my dirt, and don't use my dirt and my water. Make your own." The idea being that man at best can create something from something. In Hebrew, we say yesh miyesh. Man at best can create something from something else. God created the world out of absolute nothingness. Now, the concept of absolute nothingness is a mind-boggling concept, because we can't imagine nothing, because we are essential. Our whole existence revolves around things. But before there was anything, there was absolute nothingness. And all the basic elements that we take for granted didn't exist. And God created them all into existence in the first place. So if you think about creation as something from nothing, as opposed to something from something, and you remember, it's interesting, the Torah tells us when God created the world, what medium did he use to create? It says he spoke it into existence. And God said, "Let there be light," and there was light. And God said, "Let the earth give trees," and they gave trees, right? And God said, it's speech. God's speech is what creates the world. It's a very interesting thing. It's almost like computer code and it comes into existence. Language. So this idea, the difference between something from something and something from nothing, we're going to read on page 132, the next text. This idea offers a clear response to those who deny divine providence and the miracles of the Torah. You see, what's at stake here is, if God is creating the world at every moment into existence, that means that he's an active participant in everything that's happening in the world at the moment. God is an absolute active force of creation at every moment. Nothing is happening outside of God's realm, influence, and control. He's involved in everything all the time. So this idea offers a clear response to those who deny divine providence and the miracles of the Torah. Their mistake lies in a false comparison. They imagine, the ones who deny constant creation, imagine that God's creation of the heavens and the earth is like human craftsmanship. Just as a craftsperson might make a vessel and then walk away, with the vessel remaining intact without the artisan's ongoing involvement, they assume the same is true of the world, that once created, it runs on its own. But they fail to see a critical difference. When humans create something, they're not creating from nothing. They just reshape existing material, like turning a piece of silver into a utensil. But God created the world out of absolute nothingness. That's a far greater wonder, even more astounding than the splitting of the sea. Take that miracle as an example. God used a strong east wind to split the sea, and the water stood like a wall. But if the wind had stopped for even a moment, the waters would have immediately returned to their natural state and flowed back down, and they would not have continued standing as a wall on their own. So how much more so with creation itself, which is something from nothing? That's beyond nature and an even greater miracle than the splitting of the sea. You know what's a greater miracle than the splitting of the sea? It's an even greater miracle that there is a sea.
Mm-hmm.
Because naturally, there shouldn't be one. The natural state of things is not to exist. The only reason they exist is because God is creating it at every moment. If God were to stop sustaining the world for even a moment, God forbid, it would vanish into nothingness. The world continues to exist only because his creative energy is constantly present within it, giving it life every second.
Rabbi, that says to me that as a person, I'm never done. I'm never finished. There is God in me that continues to make me want to learn more and do more with life.
That's beautiful, Phyllis. That's beautiful. So, ladies and gentlemen, the idea ultimately of we're expressing so far today is that God is creating the world moment by moment. And if that's the case, then everything that God is making has a purpose. Everything has a purpose, because if it didn't have a purpose, he wouldn't be making it. So my brother used to have a bumper sticker that said, "I know I'm somebody because God don't make no junk." If God is creating it, it's not an accident, it's intentional. And everything, therefore, there's an intentional purpose behind everything that exists in the world. Now, we're going to compare this to a theatrical principle. It's not exactly the same thing, because this that we're saying is more true than the theatrical principle. But it's just an interesting theatrical principle that works along similar lines. But this is actually more true than the theatrical principle, which we're going to see in a second. How do I share computer sound like that?
You're in your seat as the story begins. You notice the way he stands, his accent, his jacket. You notice the gun on his belt, a symbol of bravado. But you didn't think he'd use it. Well, you should have, at least according to a rule known as Chekhov's gun. Anton Chekhov, the 19th century Russian playwright, taught that in a well-written story, every detail must serve the plot. If in the first act you hang a pistol on the wall, it should be fired in the next. Otherwise, don't put it there. In a masterful story, nothing is extra. Every prop has a purpose, every line carries weight. Nothing is random. Is there a storyteller more masterful than the creator of the universe? Is there any story more layered than the one you're living? One of Judaism's oldest mystical texts, Sefer Yetzirah, the Book of Creation, describes God as a divine scribe, writing reality into being. We're not just characters in the story. We are the story. And just like a screen goes black when the projector stops, our world depends on God's light every moment. Creation isn't a one-time event. It's continuous. intentional, ongoing. If God stops writing, we stop being. And in His story, in your life and in every event, every detail matters. Every scene, every object, every moment, every choice. If it's here, it has a role. Otherwise, it wouldn't be. Sure, things can look totally random, even horribly random at times. But the author gave us tools to seek the meaning, to live with purpose, even when the plot twists.
So that is the deep theology, ladies and gentlemen. The practical element of here, the practical takeaway from all of this is that Judaism teaches that everything that happens in the world, and the mystics and the Kabbalists understand that every single thing that happens in the world is divine providence. Every detail of creation exists for a reason. Nothing just happens to us at random. There are no random things that happen. There is an unbelievable scriptwriter known as God, who is conducting the world and deliberately arranging everything that happens in this world for a very important purpose. As articulated in a Hasidic saying, if you turn to page 133 at the bottom of the page, the Baal Shem Tov explains that even a piece of straw or a torn leaf rolling in the street is subject to divine judgment. There is a decree for exactly how many times it should turn over, where it should roll, and in which places it should end up. So even the leaf is being controlled by God and orchestrated and designed. There is no detail outside of God's script. So not only did God craft the global event, He scripted every local consequence as well. Any questions or comments? So now this is a very, very, very important way of looking at the world. And I want to show you a video now of the Lubavitcher Rebbe talking with a group of women. Now it's a very, if you think about it, it's quite a, I'm looking for a particular story over here on the screen, Never Stuck. we're going to watch a video. It's a very important video. It's very, on the one hand, it's quite simple, but on the other hand, this idea is one of the most profound and important mystical ideas we'll ever learn in our lives, because it's absolutely life-changing and transformational to think about the world this way. And this is the concept of Hashgacha Pratit.
Noch da von Zeit zu Zeit, was sie treffen Passierungen in der Welt herum a Jiden, was wie voll wir sollen in sein vernommen und zu tragen und abgegeben mit anderen Sachen, in die Passierungen allein wecken die Aufmerksamkeit und ziehen zu dem Psycho von einem Menschen und von einem Jiden befragt. Soll sehen, dass nicht Chas v'Sholem, wie der Rambam bewohnt, Mikro-Niklis, eine zufällige Sache, was hat getroffen über Eimitznis, ein Neifall oder Eimitznis, eine gute Sache, eine nicht gute Sache, nur dass jede Sache über Hashgacha Pratit ist.
The purpose of Neshei Chabad is to bring the
Neshei Chabad Convention in Detroit, Michigan. Let's say 20 ladies went, figure out how many children did we leave at home. Baruch Hashem, on my note.
It was in February 1979, and Monday morning, the women, took off for the airport because they were all planning to travel home.
In Brooklyn, in the shadow of Grand Army Plaza, some parts of Eastern Parkway are plowed out. But as you can see here, other parts of the parkway are not at all plowed. These cars stuck and good.
The Rebbe hat geholfen. There was a terrible snowstorm, so all the ladies are sitting at the airport in Detroit. No planes.
To give you an idea how bad it is and how long it may take for New York City to dig itself out of all of this snow, that tow truck is attached to this city's snowplow.
Miriam Popak's the head of Neshei Chabad out-of-town conventions at the time. Now her daughter, Mrs. Feldman, took over. She went to the telephone and she called New York.
They have to get home, and here's the snowstorm, and they all began panicking. And they asked my mother to call up 770 and ask the Rebbe for a bracha. They should be able to travel home.
Rabbi Klein answers the phone, and she says, we're stuck in Detroit. Rabbi Klein said, ein minut, and he goes to the Rebbe. Mrs. Popak keeps asking for quarters and dimes and nickels, ching, 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 ching. Rabbi Klein comes back, and he says, the Rebbe will wissen, was heißt stuck.
These are the words of the Rebbe. Monday, Chaf Beishvat. The Baal Shem Tov's teaching that every occurrence contains a directive in serving Hashem is a topic that has been spoken of and discussed at length innumerable times. I am sure that you too have given speeches on this topic. Yet now, when an incident has happened to you, you seek to attach the most distorted possible interpretation. That is absolutely amazing. The simple and obvious reason for the delay is this. It is possible to disseminate Torah and mitzvos to a far greater degree than was accomplished during the convention. You are therefore being granted the merit through the snow which descends from heaven of completing the above task with an extraordinary abundance and intensity of Judaism, similar to the extraordinary abundance of the snowfall. Your efforts in completing the convention's task of disseminating Torah and mitzvos should be extended to the city, the airport, publicity in the newspapers, etc.
Wo dem Hashem mitzad der Geber Kinono, wie der Baal Shem Tov sagt, a dort, wo a Yid gefindt sich, hat der Rebischter dahinzu geschickt und geschickt als Scholiach. Soll dort versprechen Jüdischkeit und machen lichtig die Finsterkeit von Golus durch Tero Ehe.
The women ran around the airport giving out Shabbos candles.
Some women went off to the university campus. Some of them set up different booths in shopping malls, also with Shabbos candles and talking to the women about all the mitzvahs of the Jewish women. After they reported to the Rebbe of everything they had done, this is what the Rebbe answered. It is a particularly great merit when the Almighty points with a finger and clearly shows one what to do from on high. May all your activities undertaken as a result of this divine indication be highly successful. It is obvious that each and every woman will soon travel and reach home, for she will have completed her mission.
Das, was hat getroffen, und man hat das gesehen oder gehört wegen der Ruf, und befragt nach haben wir gehört mit der Sache Einzelheiten, ist das sichere Sache, wie der Baal Shem Tov hat erklärt, als keine Sache nicht auch in Zufälligkeit in der Welt. Und jede Sache, was ein Jid sieht oder erhört, ist in der Ruf eine Anweisung von dem Ebersten, was soll sich führen, zu lieb dem, was der Eberste hat dem beschaffen, was in der Ruf besteht, echt sein Tewe, echt Begashmis im einfachsten Sinn, in dem Leben von seinem Leben und dem Besprochesleben und dem jüdischen Volksleben Bichlal, von welchem ist Teil.
There are women all over the United States today that are lighting Shabbos candles because the Nishi group, this is what they called us instead of Nishay, the Nishi group was stuck in Detroit, Michigan. Ait is kein Molnit stuck. If you're somewhere, that's where you're supposed to be.
Okay, ladies and gentlemen. So this is one of the most important principles, and we've traced from the deep mystical ideas of creation and how the world is constant creation. The natural consequence of that is that everything that's created is created for a reason. And there are no coincidences. And therefore, next time, ladies and gentlemen, your flight takes off on time, it's because God wants you to leave on time. And if your flight is delayed, it's not an accident, it's not a mistake. Instead of cursing out the airline, we should remember it's happening because God Almighty is teaching us something or placing us there for a very important purpose, or both. And this idea of living this way, when you live this way, it means your eyes are open, your heart is open, your eyes are open, because you realize nothing is just happening around you, and you're present, and you're open for the opportunities, because you realize they're everywhere, and magic starts to happen in your life. And this is one of the most important teachings in highly spiritual, effective living. So let's look at our books again for some examples on page 134. And there's multiple layers to this. There's multiple. We're going to look at each one of the examples in multiple layers. So the first example is the one we just saw in our video, page 134. Hashgacha vs. Hashgacha pratis mindset. So a scenario. You're sitting in an airport and the screen flashes, flight delayed 3 hours. So the natural inclination is to go, oh no, that's the worst thing, it's terrible, and get depressed and annoyed. But somebody who's taken some Kabbalah classes will obviously realize that that's not the way to think about it. But there's more going on over here. They're going to say, no, this is Hashgacha pratis, column 1, the first column on the left. They'll say there must be a reason for why this is happening. And they'll say, okay, take a deep breath. This is from God. Maybe there's someone who's running late who absolutely must make this flight for reasons of geopolitical importance. This delay will allow them to make this flight. I'll try to be patient. God runs the world and is also watching to make sure I'll be fine. That's one way. But they're not yet at the full depth of the idea. Because if you look a little deeper, you'd come to column number 2. There must be a reason this is meant for me. It's not only for the other guy or the world needs this plane to be late, but I need this plane to be late. Why? The delay must also be meaningful for me. Maybe it's protecting me from something. Maybe something was going to go wrong with the weather if it were to have departed on time. Maybe the meeting I was supposed to attend and that I will now miss would not have been beneficial for me. Or maybe he's just giving me time to totally finish that book I started reading in 2009. Or, if you want to go even deeper, not only is it going to be good for me, but actually the fact that I'm here right now is important. There must also be reasons for all the details of the situation, that God is putting all the details together, that why am I at this airport? I could have been stuck at home. I could have been somewhere else, right? The plane could have, lots of things could have happened. Why did this happen? In addition to all the previous truths about the reason for the delay, there's a reason I'm meant to be here, now, at this exact date, at this exact hour. Maybe I'll end up talking to the woman sitting next to me and she's someone I'm meant to meet. Maybe I'll learn something from watching the way someone handles their stress. Maybe the book I'm about to read during the delay will spark an idea that changes how I think. In other words, the point is something momentous is going on right now. Whatever's happening, by the way, if you make your flight too and it takes off, something momentous is going on in every detail of our lives. Any questions or comments? Let's look at another similar kind of scenario. Scenario number 2 on page 135. You're looking for a new house in an area you'd love to move to, but you can't find a house to fit your needs, or the only house you find in your price range fails inspection, or someone else outbids you, or ... So one way of saying is, oh no, everything's going wrong. But when you understand that everything's being controlled by God for a reason, you're not going to think that way anymore. Instead, you might think maybe someone else needed that house more urgently, perhaps a family in crisis. Maybe the entire area is part of a larger shift. It's all good. But if you go deeper, not only is there a reason this doesn't how it work out, there's a reason I am being blocked. Or even deeper than that, there's a reason I toured that specific house, met that specific realtor. In other words, ladies and gentlemen, this principle is that everything that's happening to us in our lives is meaningful. So this morning, when I taught the class, I said to the people in the class, it was more full because a bunch of the people that come at night came in the morning today. Yeah. And I said, you think that you're coming at night because you came in the morning because of something else, but actually we were all supposed to be in this room at the exact same moment. And I said, your homework, though, is everybody has a homework exercise, and the same is true for the nighttime class people. You have a homework exercise. Now, some of you are familiar with this concept because we've been in our Friday morning Kabbalah class, we've been talking about these ideas as well. And you'll remember that a few months ago, we gave everyone a homework exercise to please report next week on an incredible divine orchestration of details that happened over the past week, that because we're opening our eyes, we're going to see. Which means every time you go out your door, you have to have your eyes open to meet someone, to see something, for something to happen, to recognize the divine providence, because it's happening all around us all the time. The only question is if we're aware of it. Right? This is what's happening. So I said the homework exercise is everybody should come back next week with a story of because their eyes were open, they recognized the divine providence of the past week. And I said, who knows? Maybe we're all sitting in the room here together for a specific reason. So after class, one of the women said to me, Rabbi, I don't have to wait until next week. She says, this morning I came to class. I normally sit on this side of the table. But because there were all these extra people here today, I sat on the other side of the table. Because I'm sitting on the other side of the table, the lady next to me saw my notebook. And the notebook says that I taught at this university, says the name of the university where I taught. So she told me she was a student there. And she's been trying to reach someone in the faculty there, and she doesn't have the contact information. And it's a good friend of mine, and I gave her the information. So right here and over here, it happened already. We didn't even realize it was happening. And that's just one story. Mm-hmm. So the point of it is to open up our eyes and become aware and see all the incredible things that are happening all around us all the time. To live our lives that way, we are exactly where we're supposed to be. We have a mission in every place where we are. It's not a mistake. There's no accidents. And God Almighty is the one who's running the show. And this is the 5th step to living with deeper Kabbalah meaning in life, according to Kabbalah of meaning, is maybe even the first step is this awareness and understanding that everything that happens in our lives is divinely orchestrated. Any questions or comments?
a great principle to consider, this, but it also conveys some contradictions. Because let's say we're talking about just interaction with people. And if you think that each step is just driven by divine providence, we're completely removing free will of the people.
Beautiful question. I was waiting for the question. So the question is, there's an amazing, it's a beautiful concept and makes sense that everything is divinely orchestrated. But we also know there's a cardinal principle in Judaism that everybody has free choice. And if God is running the show at every moment, where does free choice enter the picture? So there's two answers to this question. The first answer to your question is, you say you have free choice, and we think we have free choice, but a lot of the time we don't, because we don't get to choose whether the plane is going to take off on time or not. We don't actually get to choose whether the plane is going to take off on time. So the truth is, free choice is deeper than that. Free choice is how we're going to respond. Am I going to be aware of the spiritual opportunity here? Or am I going to be oblivious to it? Am I going to fulfill my purpose in that particular area? So one of the great Kabbalists, one of the articulations of these ideas is where we are is not really up to us, but what we do there is where we have free choice. So God does determine where we're going to live and where we're going to work. And, many people are not working where they want to. You work where you get a job, right? Sometimes you get a choice between two things, and you get a choice for 5 minutes because you think you choose, and then at the end of the day, you're at the whims of other people. And if you're going to have customers or you're not going to have, you know what I mean? That's all if you work for but how you live, how you work is up to you. That's where you get moral choice, is where we get free choice. What are we going to do with the opportunities that we have? That's one answer. The second answer, and this is a very important principle also, is I'm going to say it on the side of good. The same is true when bad things happen, but I'd rather talk about good things than bad things. Let's say God decides that something wonderful is going to happen to me today. Right? So how's it going to happen? Usually it's going to happen because another person is going to make it happen. Right? So you get to choose if you want to be the one who makes it happen or not. Right? So, in other words, and the same is true, the Talmud says the principle in Hebrew is ala nigzer kvar gazar. For the one who it's going to happen to, God is decreeing it. But for the one who is delivering it, the delivery person gets to choose whether to be the one delivering it or not. So there is an interplay between free choice and divine providence that's happening in these stories. You're right. You're right that there's an interplay, and there's a logic that they both can coincide. They're not contradictory principles. That's really the main point of this discussion. There's some nice stories. So when you live this way, you realize how every moment has opportunities. Page 138 has a nice story. It's a sad story, but it's an important story. Somebody wrote, on the day of my mother's funeral, I remember sitting at the back of the car, pulling into the parking lot where the service was going to be held, and seeing two old friends of mine from elementary school walking inside. I was 15 at the time. It had never occurred to me that they would miss school to be there for me. This simple act of support meant more to me than they will ever know. The point being that when you recognize this is a story of free choice, people choosing to show up for someone else, from the perspective of the person who's receiving it, it's an incredible moment. And very often the good that's happening around us, we're not even aware that we're doing it. So the point is that there's incredible opportunity at every moment, even when we don't even realize what we're doing. Well, there's another story. The Rebbe told the story once on page 140. This is a story. This is a transcript of a speech the Rebbe once gave. Page 140. He said, my father-in-law, the previous Rebbe, Rabbi Yosef Yitzchak Schneerson, instituted several years ago that during the summer months, yeshiva students would volunteer to travel from the yeshiva to various Jewish communities in order to inspire their fellow Jews in matters of Torah, mitzvahs, and Judaism in general. Presumably, the yeshiva students have already decided to embark on this mission in a good and auspicious hour. May the trip be not only peaceful, but also successful. Not just successful in a general sense, but remarkably successful in all areas in which they will speak, and even in areas which they won't speak, but will influence simply through their very presence in these places. So Rebbe says there's a story that illustrates this. A Jew living in a small American town was deeply affected just by the sight of a young man walking by, wearing a full beard and payas, with his tzitzit visible. Curious, the man asked where this young man was from. Was he from Poland, Galicia, or Ukraine? He was told, no, he's from Boston. Now, in this country, Bostonians are regarded as being among the most distinguished. This is the Rebbe speaking in the 50s. So this man was shocked to learn that even a Bostonian could look like that. Beard, payas, visible tzitzit, and yet speak fluent English and speak with intelligence and clarity about deep concepts like the various levels of divine unity discussed in the mystical works. And this had an effect on the observer. First of all, the yeshiva fundraiser came to visit the town after the young man. He benefited in that this man gave him several extra dollars. But even more significantly, it opened him up to begin making changes in his own life. First in the area of keeping kosher, and gradually in other areas of practical mitzvah observance. And most likely the young man who set all this in motion has no idea that any of it ever happened. So the idea here is a very powerful one. That is, that sometimes just by living and doing things intentionally and kindly, so you're going to you're stuck in an airport and you don't know why you're there, doesn't mean you're not changing somebody else's life. Just by being a decent human being and living in a good way, the world has all kinds of ripple effects and you're having an incredible effect.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Let me just tell a quick story if I can, how I started taking classes with you.
Okay, that's great.
Right? I'd gotten a postcard from you many years ago. It was sitting in some papers on my desk. I was going through a very rough period in my life, and I sat at my desk, and all of a sudden it was like that card fell out from the papers and stuck out so I could see it. And it was your class on the soul. And I looked at it and I said, that's exactly what I need. And that was God working in my life then, that made that postcard visible to me at that time when I really needed something there. And I called and I registered for the class and have done that ever since.
Wow, Phyllis. Thank you so much for sharing that. So the idea being that things happen at exactly the right moment in exactly the right way, and we have to be open to open our eyes to see things and to see the opportunities that are available at every moment. And obviously the next lesson for this is a lesson from the Baal Shem Tov, page 144, text 10. Every single thing that one sees or hears is an instruction for their conduct in the service of God. This is the idea of avodah, service, to comprehend and discern in all things a way in which to serve God. In other words, whatever happens is there to teach us a lesson. So when you see something, the question is, okay, well, what can I learn from this? What can I learn from this? Sometimes it's recognizing the divine providence in how things are happening. But sometimes we have to learn from things that happen in this world. So what happened today in the world? I don't know. What's going on in the world today? I don't know. I'm not looking. But if we are looking and we're exposed to something, So the question we have to ask ourselves, okay, well, what's the moral lesson from the story? What's the moral of the story? What's the lesson we can learn from this? What can I take out of the story? Sometimes if you see a problem in the world, it's God's way of telling you how you can help. How He can help. Right? Everything that happens, it's not, there's a lesson for us, there's a guidance, there's a thing. So it's about living very intentionally, with open eyes, trying to understand the story. So I'll give you another example. This morning, I've been showing videos in the class. 2 videos so far. I gave the class at the Federation building in Stanford this morning. For whatever reason, even though the thing was hooked up to the screen or whatever, the videos were not playing. I don't understand why, but I know why they didn't play. God didn't want me showing videos this morning. That's the reason. It's obvious. Because we needed to talk. I don't know, maybe one of these people would have not liked it. Who knows what? But the point is that the recognizing, and so I was sitting over there fiddling with these videos and trying and getting all frustrated when I suddenly realized, hello, this is the perfect example. You think that you have a plan, but God has a better plan. There's another way of doing it. And that's a very, very important lesson in spiritual living, in living meaningfully, which is we have a plan, but plans change. And instead of getting frustrated when our plan is not happening the way we thought it was going to happen, to be aware and say, hold on a second. God has a different plan for me. God has a different plan for me. And so I'm gonna, and that's the story of this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion is the story of Joseph. So Joseph's brothers sold him into slavery, right? They threw him into a pit, and then they sold him into slavery. And he goes down to Egypt for 22 years, until finally there's a famine in the land, and he's in exactly the right place to save them all. And they come up to him at the end, and they're petrified on how he's going to react to them. And he says to them, guys, I got no grudge against you. I recognize that the only reason all this happened was that God would put me in the place where I needed to be in order to save everybody when the time would come. Now, that's one heck of a way of living spiritually. It's interesting. Nowhere in the Torah, when it talks about Joseph and going through a lot of difficult experiences along the way, nowhere does it say, and Joseph became depressed and despondent. He didn't. He recognized something's going on over here. In fact, there's one time when the king's butler and the king's baker were thrown into jail, and Joseph saw them and they were upset and they were depressed. And Joseph said, why are you so sad? He couldn't understand. Why would people be sad? Why? They're in jail. That's why they're sad. He's like, what do you mean? If you're here, it's for a reason. So I was thinking about the same thing. He's thrown into this pit. The Torah says about the pit that they threw him into. The pit was empty. There was no water. So the commentary says it's like Chekhov's gun. If it says there's no water, it must mean there's something else in there. I didn't need that line. It was empty. There was no water. It means there was something else in there. What was in there? The commentary says snakes and scorpions. Imagine him being in a pit with snakes and scorpions because your brother threw you in there. I couldn't think of anything more depressing. But Joseph knew it's all part of a plan. So that capacity, and then he's the most successful person. Everywhere he goes, he's successful. Because that's what makes us successful. Instead of sitting around and complaining, why me? And what a horrible life, what a difficult life I have. Joseph said, okay, I'm here. It's because God is setting something good up for me. And no matter what's going on, he's ready. He's like, there's an opportunity here. What's the next opportunity? He's optimistic because he realizes that it's for the good. Let's examine another biblical story, page 145. We know that after Noah came out of the ark, after the flood, Noah came out of the ark, and it says Noah began to farm and planted a vineyard. He drank from the wine, became drunk, and lay exposed in his tent. Ham, the father of Canaan, saw his father's nakedness and told his two brothers outside. Shem and Japheth took a garment, laid it across their shoulders, and walked backwards to cover their father's nakedness. Their faces were turned away, and they did not see their father's naked. So there's 2 points to the story. Number one, this is a story when you see somebody else exposed and not in a good situation. One son gawked. He became a gawker. You know what I mean? Somebody's sitting over there watching the show and making fun. The other two chose not to look, but rather to fix, to help. When you see a problem in the world, you can look at it and say, oh, look how horrible that is.
Mhm.
Or you could choose not to look and rather to help. That's a very important lesson as well. Yeah. Ladies and gentlemen, let's go back to the PowerPoint. Go through the last slides. There's one more video. Let's see what it says over here. Every detail, no matter how circumstantial, is with intention. Right? So in the details of life, in the script of life, there are no coincidences. If you see something, it's intentional. And if you open up your eyes, you might just figure out why. Our mission in every circumstance is clear: to serve God, whether it's through doing mitzvahs. Oh, is my screen being shared?
No.
Okay, let me do this 1 second. So our mission is clear: to serve God, whether it's doing the rituals of the mitzvahs, whether it's being kind and refining the world or helping others. In each thing, wherever we are, it's about living spiritually. We don't get to control the circumstances of our life, but that's okay. It's about pivoting and recognizing the opportunity to do good in every particular situation, and recognizing that we might have thought this was the right path for me, but God had something else in plan for me, and it's good. And so our mission is exactly where we are. Some people think that like I made a terrible mistake and I'm living where I am, or I got stuck in a thing. That's not the way it works in life. It just doesn't work that way. It's a very important lesson about living spiritually. The ability to pivot. It's called, they talk about motivational coping mechanisms, flexible goal adjustments, pivoting to new or alternative goals when the original becomes unattainable. You know, sometimes you're banging your head against a wall and it's not, you have an agenda in your mind, but it's not just not what God wants. So you think it's you don't realize. So it doesn't mean that one shouldn't persevere in something, but it does mean there comes a certain point where we have to recognize that the plan changed. And number two, a very important ability to reframe things. This allows us to view a stressful situation from a different perspective and saying, instead of being, you're not stuck at an airport in Michigan, but God placed you there to do something good. And that gives a tremendous thing. Meaning is in everything. It doesn't depend on our ability to see it. Sometimes amazing things are happening and we don't even know that it happened. I have that from time to time. People tell me I gave a talk 10 years ago and it's had an effect on them. I had no idea. Or they see me or they this. I remember there was a lady in the community who told me that Okay, a million stories like this. But the idea is sometimes the most incredible things happen. We don't even know that other people were watching and had an impact on their lives. At the same time, being aware of what's happening is itself part of the plan. We don't have to walk around with blinkers. Let's try to be aware of the things that are happening in our lives. So, no matter what happens to us, we have to ask ourselves, what's the personal meaning behind this moment? With awareness comes a call to action. We might have, and this is a very important thing, we might have thought that our life was going to be a certain narrative, but sometimes things change. And then recognizing the important opportunities in everything. This is the story we saw before. About Noah's sons, their faces were turned backwards. They were not looking to see anything wrong. Their attitude is they didn't see their father's attitude. So ultimately what today's class is saying, so we should stay awake to the divine presence, look for divine presence in all things, which gives us clarity. Ladies and gentlemen, we're going to conclude with one last video. By divine providence, it's all by divine providence. By divine providence, some of what's in this video is about that rabbi in Israel, Rabbi Elitzir, that we watched a little bit of his story last week. But by divine providence, not everybody was in class last week. And JLI put it into this week. So I was thinking, should we show it or should we not show it? Obviously, if it's here, and it's other, we should, by divine providence, we should show it. So let's watch anyone who has, and if you're seeing it for a second time, if you're seeing any parts of this for a second time, it's because that's what God wants us to do. That's it, right? And I don't know why, but it doesn't mean we shouldn't do it. So let's go. But this is an incredible example of the capacity to recognize that God has a plan that we don't necessarily know, and then to use the opportunity of the plan, what's happening in this world. Even the most difficult things are opportunities for goodness and kindness and growth and learning and spiritual development in the world.
Rabbi Liraz Ze'ira is a Chabad emissary to Nachalot Israel and services students in Jerusalem campuses. He is a major in the IDF reserves.
I just want to stop for a second and just ask everybody, who was here last week watching the videos with this rabbi? By show of hands. So I see 2 hands up, which means most people haven't discovered this incredible story yet. So let's watch.
In an elite Givati unit, and then as a reserve combat officer in a tank battalion. Rabbi Liraz recently trained to become an IDF rabbi. But along the Syrian border, his life took a dramatic turn.
נפרדתי, זה יום אחרון אחרי 7 חודשים של קו. אני אמור למחרת אני חוזר הביתה. באתי להגיד שלום לפלוגת חי"ר שהייתה תחתנו. אחד החיילים אמר לי שהעירוב נראה לו פחות תקין.
העירוב זה הקו שתוחם את האזור, כדי שבשבת אפשר יהיה ללכת עם דברים
בדיוק. הגדרה הלכתית מדויקת. הלכתי לבדוק אותו, במהלך זה דרכתי על רימון שכנראה נשאר שם מהכיבוש של התל.
The explosion shredded his legs and sent him rolling down a hill. He began to bleed out.
היית לבד?
הייתי לבד, זחלתי למרכז.
ואתה מבין שאין לך רגליים?
אני מבין שהרגליים לא מקשיבות לי. והתחלתי לזחול לכיוון הציר, איזה 20-30 מטר, עד ששמעתי את החיילים מגיעים לכיווני, התחלתי לצעוק. החיילים מגיעים לכיווני.
למה הם הגיעו?
כי הם שמעו פיצוץ, כי הם ראו עשן, היו בטוחים שיש התקפה על המוצב.
Rabbi Liraz was evacuated in critical condition. As he fought for his life and fought to stay alert, he also fought back his screams to avoid traumatizing the younger soldiers. And while directing those aiding him, he began his spiritual fight.
באיזשהו שלב אני יוצא עם את העיניים ואומר, טוב, תשחרר, תן להם להוביל. והתחלתי להגיד תהילים. אחד החיילים שרואה אותי ממלמל, אז הוא מצטרף. הוא התחיל להגיד, שמע ישראל. ואני פותח את העיניים ואומר לו, לא! אני נשאר פה, אני לא הולך לשום מקום. לא יודע איך הוא...
איזה תהילים אמרת ראשון?
את הפרק של הרבי, את הפרק שלי, את הפרק של הילדים שלי, שיר למעלות.
שיר למעלות, אשא עיניי להרים?
Rabbi Liraz soon discovered that his legs had been amputated. Even in the face of life-changing injury, purpose gave him strength. With a mission in mind, he realized his life hadn't ended, it had only changed direction. Even in loss, purpose became his anchor.
במקום באסה או כל דבר כזה, נהיה לי פשוט מאוד רוגע. ואני יכול להשליך את זה רק על דבר אחד, שזה באמת הזכות להיות חסיד של הרבי מלובביץ' ושליח של הרבי מלובביץ', ולקבל את הנושא הזה של באמת, אין דבר כזה נכה צה"ל. אין מושג כזה נכה צה"ל, יש מצויני צה"ל. אתה לא משהו נחות, אתה לא נכה, זה דבר שנופל, זה... לא. אתה הדבר הכי מצוין שיש, הכי גבוה שיש, ופשוט באותו רגע הבנתי שיש לי שליחות חדשה. שזה נגמר פרק בחיים שלי ומתחיל פרק חדש לגמרי.
Being thrust into the national spotlight clarified one thing. He had something to give. His influence had direction. It had meaning.
שיש לי מה לתת, שאני חייב לתת את זה, שיש לי המון השפעה על אנשים.
That drive gave meaning to every step he would take next. His mission wasn't just personal. It was to inspire others, showing that challenges can become a calling.
יש לנו יצחקו את הקטע שהוא רוקד בראש חודש, שנכנס ראש חודש מרחשוון, העלית את הסרטון הזה.
Each act, each post, each interaction became an expression of his purpose, helping others find their own.
תשמע, יש לך כוחות. תאמין בעצמך ותדע שאתה תמיד יכול. ואני יוצא מהאירוע הזה לא רק ביודע שאני יכול, אלא יודע שאני קיבלתי מתנה. זה מאוד קשה להגיד. זה באמת מאוד קשה להגיד, אבל אני אומר את זה בלב שלם לגמרי, שאומנם רגליים איבדתי, אבל שליחות חדשה קיבלתי. וקיבלתי אותה בהמון המון שמחה, והמון באמונה, ובידיעה שאני הולך לצמוח מזה. אני הולך לרוץ יותר ממה שרצתי קודם, זה לא כזה קשה. אני הולך להיות אולי אפילו טיפה יותר גבוה. אני הולך להיות לי כל מיני מבחר של רגליים, כאלה של שטח וכאלה של... ואני הולך להשתמש בזה ואני הולך לעוף על זה, גם בגשמיות וגם בהשפעה של זה.
Each set of legs represented a new way to turn limitation into opportunity, to transform loss into meaning. This calling was now the engine behind every step. Rabbi Liraz's journey shows that purpose changes everything. Even when life takes something from you, a mission gives every moment meaning, every challenge a reason to rise. His new mission and the meaning it brings is only just beginning.
זה שלרבי מלובביץ' יש הרבה סוגי שליחים בעולם, במקומות נידחים, אבל שליח כמוך, עם מה שאתה תהיה עכשיו, זה לא היה לו עד היום, ובהצלחה בשליחות הגדולה.
God should bless him with a complete recovery. Any questions or comments, ladies and gentlemen? So let's remember that God blesses us with wonderful things every day. Let's use the blessings that we have to recognize the opportunities in every day, in every moment, in every encounter, in every circumstance, and use it to the fullest capacity that we have. And certainly that will bring more light and goodness and warmth and brightness to the rest of the world and to us too. Thank you very much, everybody, for joining. This concludes lesson 5 of our course, and we'll see you next week for the 6th and final class in the Kabbalah of meaning.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Rabbi.
Thank you all. We'll see you soon.
Night.